Yeah, I think for me personally, as a scientist, I'm always looking for answers that science can tackle, that science can explain. I never say science can answer all questions. That would be very arrogant. And I think in all debates, one should never be 100% certain. 100% certain there's no God, 100% certain there is a God, 100% certain that your ideology is correct. We should always have room for doubt, to question, to be prepared to have somebody persuade us or change our minds. That's what a good scientist should do. But in seeking answers to the big questions, whether it's the nature of consciousness, whether it's the meaning of life, these are questions that have been tackled by philosophers, by theologians, by scientists, by anybody who's thinking, who has a brain will think about these questions. So I don't say I have a better answer, but I like to use science to explain and answer questions. I don't want getting to the point where you say, we cannot explain this any further. This is down to the divine creator, it's part of God's plan. I will step back. I'm not addressing that. I'd like to be able to push, how far can science be used to explain? Now, something like consciousness or the origin of life or what is different about life from inanimate matter, these are hugely important questions. But I want to see how far science can go in tackling them. I'm not saying science replaces all philosophy and metaphysics and religion, but I'm on the science side and I want to push it as far as I can and see what it can achieve.
In this podcast, I'm sharing my passion and curiosity for soft robotics, where we share inspiring stories about the work we do and how we can push the limit. I am Mara Dwayne, and this is Soft Robotics Podcast. Support for this show comes from Science Robotics Journal. I really find Science Robotics to be a great resource for reliable and tangible research where we can really push the limit of the science we do in robotics. Great way to stay up to date with the published article is checking out the released monthly issue. All the links will be included in each episode description. We will also happen to have a regular conversation on the most published science robotic articles, where also you can contribute with your question and thoughts about the research. Thanks Science Robotics for sponsoring Soft Robotics Podcast. Do you still have questions, maybe in science in your life, still you doubting about the real answer for it, maybe in science or life?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's quite normal for everyone to still have questions, to still have puzzles that we don't understand all the way through our lives. Life would be very boring if we had all the answers. So I feel privileged that there are still questions that I can ask and answers that I can look for.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I want to ask you, since you have been in science communication and being in academia, what's maybe highlights about science communication besides academia? Do you think there's a difference or something interesting here?
They are different. And of course, not all active academics, research scientists would be good or natural science communicators. Likewise, there are many people who are brilliant communicators, but who are not actively working in science, then maybe they're not doing research. For me, I've always liked to do both. I've always liked to be a scientist who communicates rather than a scientist communicator in sort of 100% of my time. So I derive as much pleasure in doing the research myself and asking the questions and trying to figure stuff out for myself, learning something about the world. I derive as much pleasure in doing that as I do explaining what I've learned to a wider public, to an audience. Now, where that audience could be my students here at university, they could be the people who read my books, there may be people who watch my TV programs or in public lectures. So I feel my philosophy has always been, if I learn something new about how the world is, how the world works, why would I not want to shout about it to anybody who would listen? Why would I want to keep it a secret to myself? So sharing, communicating the knowledge is as important to me as discovering it for myself.
Mm-hmm. So you said that what happened to you in the career, I think, a sequence of happy accidents, as maybe in broadcasting, and that's interesting. And I would like to ask you what may be interesting, or maybe something you learned so far in this journey was very interesting to you.
Well, I guess what's most interesting, what I most remember and treasure, is being able to have access to places, to talking to people, to even holding something physical that has a very important meaning in science and in my scientific career, which I have been able to do through my TV work, for example. So traveling around the world, making a documentary for the BBC has allowed me to have access to some incredible things that I would never have had the chance to see. You know, whether it's Isaac Newton's notebook, whether it's Galileo's lecture pulpit, whether it's some ancient observatory on top of a mountain in northern Iran. You know, these are wonderful moments and powerful memories that I have, thanks to my work in broadcasting, in working for the BBC in particular, that I don't think I'd ever have had the opportunity to see otherwise.
Mm-hmm. But I want to ask you, since you've been in academia and also this other side, what really differentiates both of them? Do you think there's something maybe missing in academia? Because I think being what you're doing, I think it's very interesting. Do you think this difference is still maybe in academia and what you're doing broadcasting? Do you think what is missing here?
Well, they're different worlds, really. You know, in academia, we have certain responsibilities and certain things we have to do. We have to teach undergraduate students. We develop our own research. We have, if we're lucky, we have funding to carry out a research program with colleagues, with research staff. We publish papers. We go to conferences. There's a whole machinery in the academic world that we are part of in order to advance knowledge and to share that knowledge with the next generation of scientists, engineers, and so on in my area. Working in public life as a communicator there's a different motivation there. There it's to try and explain, justify what we do in academia, justify why the public should pay taxes to support our research, but also to try and ensure the wider society has some level of scientific literacy. And we know now how important that is. It's not just because the people out in wider society are fascinated by black holes, right, or something exotic. It's because it's necessary that people understand how science works. We've known that during the last 2 years of the pandemic. It's been important for people to learn the process of science, how we never know something for sure, how we should be able to change our minds when we gather more information. So there's a different motivation for communicating science compared with the life as an academic. And I enjoy both. But sometimes when I'm talking to someone, say from the media, from television, but then at the same time I'm talking to someone from the academic world, I realize that they almost speak different languages. So I feel lucky that I can wear both hats, that I can jump from one to the other.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I want to ask you maybe what are bigger questions, maybe not touch it, maybe in academia or also broadcasting, because sometimes there's controversy or people don't like this kind of question in science. Do you have any encounterment like this question may be controversial and not touch it, maybe in academic community or broadcasting? Or if you have encountered also criticism about it?
I've tried to be careful. As academics, we learn not to have opinions or make strong statements about subjects outside of our specialism. So very often academic will, for the wider public, they think, well, look, you're a scientist. Surely you can answer this question. And they will say, no, that's not my area. I don't feel confident to say something. As a science communicator, I've learned to be a bit more relaxed about that, because the level that people want some understanding, I'm probably able to explain it. But absolutely, there are issues which I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel I can add something to. The issues, science versus religion, for example, or debates currently on social media. There are very passionate debates, whether it's, certainly here in the UK, for example, whether it's issues about anti-Semitism, whether it's issues about the trans debate. These are very polarizing ideologies. Each side believes passionately that they are 100% correct. And as a scientist, I am trained to say, well, nothing is 100%. And when you have these sorts of debates, what you really need to say is, well, you have a good point, but you also have a valid point. The truth is some combination. But that doesn't seem to be allowed these days in public discourse. Everything's very polarized. So on those sorts of issues where I think if I say something, it'll be, neither side will be satisfied, and therefore both sides might attack me. So it's best if I stay quiet. Now, maybe I should have more courage to speak out, but I tend to avoid controversy if possible, just because I want an easier life. I don't want to be uncomfortable.
There's something you're afraid of in that case, because I think, you mentioned there's valid point about people maybe polarized about certain topics. Is there something you're afraid of in that process, that when you prepare for maybe interview and podcasters, whatever, is it something you're afraid of when you consider what are you trying to explain? Or
not so much these days. I think I'm because I've been communicating science for many years now. Well, probably 25 years or longer, nearly 30 years now. I had a traditional academic training, PhD, and then research, and then a young lecturer. But at some point early in my career, I started doing science communication. So over these years, I have learnt not to make the mistake of saying something that I regret afterwards. Being careful about what I say and how I say it, being respectful of the audience that I'm talking to, is something that I hope comes automatically to me now. So I tend not to be nervous when interviewers say, is there anything you don't want to talk about? I say, look, just let's see, just ask me what you like. If I feel uncomfortable, I will tell you. But I'm usually quite good now. My wife used to be very critical. She said, "Why did you talk about this? Why did you say that?" So I now I have my wife's voice in my head saying, "Be careful what you say about this." So I tend to be more careful these days. So the problems don't usually come up.
Oh, yeah. I want to ask you this question, but I think it's very interesting about your views about life and evolution. And I think it has a relationship maybe with if there was a God. I know you have been asked this question many times, but I want to be brief here. When we see that robots, because soft robotics, and I saw in your interview that if we can do, like, for example, computer with consciousness, and you say, why not if we change with different biological material, then I think that's very interesting in soft robotics, using material with consciousness, etc. When you look for an inspiration, my question is inspiration, when we try to find an answer for certain things in life, and I totally respect your point of view that you don't believe in, or don't have a strong belief that there's supernatural creator that can do this. Can you elaborate more your views? Because I think it's very interesting to more in depth and answer for what we have in evolution.
Yeah, I think for me personally, as a scientist, I'm always looking for answers that science can tackle, that science can explain. I never say science can answer all questions. That would be very arrogant. And I think in all debates, one should never be 100% certain. 100% certain there's no God, 100% certain there is a God, 100% certain that your ideology is correct. We should always have room for doubt, to question, to be prepared to have somebody persuade us or change our minds. That's what a good scientist should do. But in seeking answers to the big questions, whether it's the nature of consciousness, whether it's the meaning of life, Yeah, these are questions that have been tackled by philosophers, by theologians, by scientists, by anybody who's thinking, who has a brain, will think about these questions. So I don't say I have a better answer, but I like to use science to explain and answer questions. I don't want getting to the point where you say, we cannot explain this any further. This is down to the divine creator, it's part of God's plan. I will step back. I'm not addressing it. I'd like to be able to push how far can science be used to explain. Now, something like consciousness or the origin of life or what is different about life from inanimate matter, these are hugely important questions. But I want to see how far science can go in tackling them. I'm not saying science replaces all philosophy and metaphysics and religion, but I'm on the science side and I want to push it as far as I can and see what it can achieve.
Great. Maybe I want to ask you, in this journey, is there something topics maybe in physics or science was maybe surprising? And when you try to do the research and explaining or simplifying to general public, it was quite surprising for you and not convincing still. Do you have this moment that, yeah, I'm not really convinced about this answer or...
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about science, that usually in other walks of life and other ideologies, people tend to be very certain about their view, or they feel very unshakable in their viewpoint, and so difficult to persuade them otherwise. Whether it's your politics, or whether it's your faith, or whether it's what football team you support, you're not going to persuade me otherwise. In science, we are trained not to think that way. We're trained to think that I have a theory or hypothesis or mathematical equation, which I think is right, but maybe it's wrong. And I should be prepared to change my mind if some new evidence comes about. So I always say in science, admitting that we're wrong is a strength, not a weakness. In many other areas of human interaction, admitting your mistakes is seen as a weakness. Politicians will never admit that they make a mistake, right? That this is, a good politician is someone who's very firm and strong in their belief. They never change their mind. If scientists never changed their mind or never admitted their mistakes, we would never make progress. We would still be thinking the same way as the ancient Greeks probably thought. So you have to change your attitude. You have to never have certainty about something. Otherwise, you would never progress. So always in my life, whether it's doing my research in quantum mechanics, whether it's explaining something that I think I understand in any area of science, or even I try in outside of my work in daily life. If I'm having a debate or argument with somebody, I try to go against the automatic human nature and listen to them and say, well, maybe they're right. Maybe what I think is wrong. And I should be prepared to listen and change my mind, because that's what science teaches us to do.
Maybe there's a question from the audience asking about why footballers are more famous than scientists.
I mean, one of my ambitions as a science communicator was to have science to be embedded in popular culture, that we should talk about, astronomy or genetics or some new discovery in the same way we talk about football or music or culture, arts, literature. It should be part of our conversation. Not everyone wants to spend, most of us have, most people have difficult lives, difficult challenges. You have to work, you have to look after your family, you have all these other problems. We don't have time to have the deep thoughts about quantum mechanics or Einstein. We don't have the training. So for most people, what we want to do that makes us passionate, that takes us away from our daily problems and challenges, are things like music or football, or other sports. So I think that's absolutely fine. I'm passionate about football and I'm passionate about science. I can have both passions running in parallel. I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, great. So I listened to your episode, I think, in the Life Scientific podcast about the fall of dinosaur and rise of mammal. I think it was very interesting, especially
in soft robotic, there is inspiration here. But I want to ask you, in the question of the mind-body problem, for example, consciousness, what does it take to answer this question? You mentioned that there is no magic here, but I want to ask you, what does it take to ask or maybe answer this question? Do you think, what is maybe the steps needed to answer this question?
I think the initial steps have been taken in computer science, in psychology, and in philosophy. I don't think it's a physicist like me that's going to answer the question of the nature of consciousness. That what is the difference between something that is self-aware and something that isn't. I have my views on it, but having a view on something is opinion. That's not science. But I've never, from talking to computer scientists, philosophers, neuroscientists, psychologists, I have not been persuaded of an argument that says this is not solvable. I think we are a very, very long way from developing a computer, a robot, or any artificial intelligence that is self-aware. At the moment, we have AIs that we say they're very clever, but they're not clever. They're dumb. They're just following instructions. When you say, if I say SIRI, if I say the word, my phone will say, yes, what do you want? So I won't say, hey, but, things like that. And Alexa on Google, when you ask them questions and they answer you, it's not clever. It doesn't understand what it's doing. So we're a long way from being able to have AIs that are conscious. We're a long way from understanding the mind-body problem. But I think it's a problem that we can understand. You mentioned in asking your question, you're right. I don't believe that the human brain is something other than the sum of its parts. Now they fit together the human brain is the most complex system in the universe, but it's made of atoms, and they interact via forces and fields according to the laws of physics and chemistry. We don't have a complex system and then we sprinkle the magic dust and life is formed. So in my view, consciousness should be understandable. Now we may be a very long way from it. But I have not yet been persuaded that artificial general intelligence shouldn't be possible in one way or another.
I want to ask you, there's something you disagree with the way maybe discussing certain topics in science, maybe in general perspective. Do you have different views or disagreement, the way you approach maybe answering certain question?
Yeah, I think disagreements happen all the time in science. There's a colleague of mine, a very prominent physicist called Michael Berry, who's a very, very senior physicist. He should have probably won a Nobel Prize in physics. He's made some big advances. But he told me a very simple and beautiful definition of how scientists behave. We say, unlike in other areas of life, for example, politics or whatever, scientists disagree without being disagreeable. That we can argue all the time about who is right and who is wrong, but that's a perfectly normal part of the scientific process. We don't shout, we don't get, well, okay, we may get angry, if I have a theory and I've published my papers and I believe my theory is correct, and then someone tells me my theory is rubbish, yeah, I probably wouldn't be happy about it. But in general, we have to be able to disagree. If again, it's like not admitting mistakes. If we never disagreed with each other, we would never make progress. So it's healthy to disagree within science, because disagreement leads to new ideas. New ideas, we hope, are better, are closer to the truth of how the world is. So we have to disagree all the time.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I want to ask you, first of all, congratulations for your upcoming book, Joy of Science. But I want to ask you, when it comes to podcasting and writing, is there something different? I don't know, but for me, I'm not a good writer, so I want to ask you what different between audio medium and writing. I know it's in academia, you have to write, but is there something you feel this intimate connection with people listening, and I think it's, I don't know if there's difference between writing and using audio medium here.
I think there is. I think there is a big difference. I think in broadcasting, whether it's TV or radio or podcasts, or indeed even in public lectures that I give, you have an audience and there's an immediacy about it. So you are responding to the audience. You may be asking a question, or you may be explaining something that you can immediately see the response to it. People will, you'll know whether they've understood something or not. So you're even if it's prepared, even if it's a prepared script for radio or TV, you have your audience already there, that you talk, looking through the camera lens, you're imagining somebody sitting there listening to you, even if it's not live, obviously. But with writing, it's different. With writing, I'm in complete control. I spend my time thinking about, how do I explain this concept? What is a good example here? What words should I use? So it's a creative process that I'm in control of in terms of the time and effort I put in. And I think probably, if I'm honest, that's what I enjoy the most. I'm my own boss when it's writing. And I certainly prefer to write my popular science books over writing technical papers. Research papers, we have to do it as scientists, but you have to follow certain norms and traditions of how the phrases we use, the structure, the format of a technical paper has to follow some rules. With popular science writing, I make up those rules. I decide, should I put a diagram here? Should I explain this idea in 2-3 pages? Or should I say, this is very complicated, I won't bother? So for me, writing, the creative process of writing, is the most pleasurable, because I'm in more control of it than any other medium.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I want to ask you, there's any other things maybe in science communication need more focus or attention? Do you think I think it's related to being sometimes for myself, sometimes I feel like bored, or how I can recreate myself, for example. And I want to ask you, since you have this huge experience, how do you make sure the topics maybe meet the taste of the general public? Is it certain topics, or the way you try to simplify? Maybe some wisdom here, how we make sure it's entertaining all the time.
Well, I mean, I've been lucky, certainly with broadcasting, with my TV documentaries and my radio programs. I'm not working alone, so I'm not making those decisions. So I'm working with directors and producers who are very talented, who also have their views about what would be good, what would be the best way to explain something. So in TV, for example, it's very different from giving a lecture. You have to tell a story. It has to be entertaining as well as educational. You can't hit people with lots of hard science for 1 hour. You've got to give them an idea, then allow it to, so there's some, the rhythm of the program is something that has to be carefully developed. And that isn't my job. That's the job of the producer, the director, the editor of the program. With the radio programs, the script that I write when I'm interviewing other scientists, I'm working together with a radio producer. So they also have their views. So it's not, down to me. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, with my writing, that's just me. Yes, I may send my draft script to my book editor. They can read it, they can give me feedback, but actually it's my own. I'm in control of it. So I don't think there's any magic lesson about what to pick, what is the interesting subject. It's a collaborative process, and it does depend on who the audience is that we're aiming at. The most important thing in science communication is to have empathy with your intended audience. It's no good me talking about cosmology or quantum mechanics to primary school children. If I'm talking about the history of science in the Islamic world, then I know people from the Islamic world, from the Arabic-speaking world, are going to be much more interested in it than people in the West. And so it's knowing your audience. The TV stuff that I do, we do it for a particular channel on the BBC. I have a good idea who those viewers are. in general, what is their level of education? What is their general interest? There are people who are interested in science. Sometimes I'm giving talks or doing something for a much wider audience who may be not interested in science, or maybe they don't like science. Maybe they're suspicious of science. I have to then approach it in a different way. And so the skill in science communication is to be able to adjust how you present your ideas, how you speak, even how you project your own personality, depending on who you're trying to inspire or persuade or educate or entertain.
Mm-hmm. Since we're close to the end, maybe a few question. I want to ask you what makes you fulfilled, this moment of fulfillment or changing moments in what you have been doing so far.
Well, fulfillment in my career, in my job. It's nice when I get an award, or people say you're wonderful, and you've done this, published this paper, written this great book. But I think in science, certainly in science communication, the real pleasure and fulfillment I get is when I discover that I've changed somebody's life, that I've moved their life in a direction. So sometimes, someone will come to me and say, I watched your TV program 10 years ago when I was in school. I've now just finished my PhD in astrophysics, but I was inspired to follow that path because I watched your program. So thank you. That makes me not only proud, but it's emotional, because I'm doing my science communication because I enjoy it myself. I get my own pleasure. I'm not doing it because I'm such a great person that has to, educate the world. I do it because it gives me pleasure. But when I discover I've changed someone's life in some way, then I realize that that's a very fulfilling moment for me. That I know that I've had some real influence, not just somebody who's enjoyed reading my book or someone who's enjoyed watching my program, but someone whose life was changed because of something that I've done. That's really fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. So I'll ask you what kind of maybe truths you are seeking in your life, maybe answers, or maybe something deep down, maybe we don't know, that's worrying to you, this kind of truths you're seeking.
I think it's the same questions that I'm asking now as the questions that I had when I was a boy. What is the nature of reality? What makes me me? If my parents hadn't met and I was never born, where would I exist? Would I ever exist? So these are metaphysical questions, philosophical questions that I still think about now. But because of my scientific training, I have more specific, concrete questions relating to my work. What is the nature of the quantum world? How do atoms behave? What does it mean if this system has this property? How does it change? So understanding the universe using my training in physics, those are the questions I'm asking as part of my job. But I still have exactly the same existential questions that everybody has, I think. What is the nature of life? What is my place in the universe? Why are we here? Those are questions that my physics equations aren't going to answer. And therefore, I will be asking the questions just like every other human being, I guess.
Mm-hmm, great. Maybe two questions left. I want to ask you, since I think in the podcast we had an episode about testing material recovered from UFO crashes, and I think there's people who really dislike these topics, such like aliens and materials, sort of stuff like that. Do you think there's something like why the general public hates sometimes talking about certain topics? Do you think there's a reason behind that?
Well, I think because they're mysterious and they're somehow magical. I remember when I was a teenager, there was a magazine called The Unexplained, which had all sorts of paranormal stories, whether it's telepathy, whether it's other psychic ability, whether it's UFOs, alien abductions, the Bermuda Triangle. All these, they're mysterious things that they're magical and fascinating because they're mysterious. Now, my scientific training has taught me that any one of those subjects can either be explained by our current understanding of the laws of physics, or it can't, but the evidence for it isn't very strong. So in a sense, for me, life has got a bit more boring because some of these magical things I don't believe are true. But the world is full of magical things that are true. You know, I talk in my new book about the beauty of a rainbow, understanding the science of how a rainbow is formed, the fact that you and I can look at the rainbow in the sky, but we're looking at different rainbows because the light coming into our eyes comes from different drops of rain. There's magic, there's mystery, there's beauty in the real world. We don't need the stories that aren't really based on science. But I can understand why people want to have magic and mystery in the world. The world would be very boring if everything could be explained rationally and there was no magic or no mystery. Luckily, there's still lots of mysteries in the world. I don't think they're to do with aliens and UFOs, but I think the mysteries of the natural world are good enough for me.
Maybe in retrospect, is there something you would like to change in your life? Maybe this moment wish would change or nothing?
I've been very lucky, I think, in my life. I was lucky enough to meet my wife. We've been married for 37 years now, nearly. So it's I have two wonderful children who have grown up, who are happy, who are working, who have partners. My career has, yes, it's been a series of lucky accidents. I'd never had a plan when I was first studying physics as a student to say, one day I'm going to be writing popular science books or making TV and radio programs. I just wanted to learn physics. So things have happened. Things have fallen into place luckily. Maybe subconsciously I took the right decisions at the right moments in my life. But I've not had to overcome very major challenges in my life. Things have happened, in the right way for me. So if I look back, is there anything I would change? Of course, we have to be careful. If you change one thing in your life, your path will then diverge and may be very different from where it is now. So since I'm happy and content in my place now at this moment in time, I would prefer not to make any changes in the past because they may lead to a very different future for me that may not be as fulfilling and as good as this one. So I should be satisfied and happy with what I have, and I am.
If there is something maybe still aspire beside what you have been done, still you have this aspiration to achieve in your mind.
I hope my football team, Leeds United, become more successful again, like they were when I first started supporting them. That's one aspiration. In science, my area of expertise is quantum mechanics, and everybody knows quantum mechanics. The theory that describes the subatomic world is very counterintuitive and difficult to understand. Well, the mathematics is very powerful and correct. We trust it, we believe it, but we still don't understand the reasons why the quantum world behaves the way it does. So for me, if there was one hope or dream that I could have come true before I die, it's to know what is the correct interpretation of quantum mechanics. What is actually going on when this atom goes from here to here? My mathematics tells me that, if you have an atom here, at some other point, there's some probability you'll find it over here. But what is happening? The mysteries of the quantum world are things that we're still trying to understand 100 years after they were first discovered. And I'd like to think that maybe I'll never discover them, but maybe if somebody does, please explain it to me before I die.
Maybe the last question. Is there advice maybe given to you with a life changing, or be it something you'd like to say when it comes to advice on life, maybe if you would like to share?
I've had many people growing up in my life who've given me good advice about what to do. I've had some professors who were very encouraging of me in the path that I took. I think probably the best advice was to follow what makes me curious. You know, we can very easily fall into a path in our lives where we do things automatically, or because we feel we should, because, you know, I need to get a job, because I need to earn a living to pay my mortgage, to support my family. And most of us have to do that. We don't have that luxury of going and living on an island somewhere. But the advice that I've been given by more than one person, I should say, has always been that I should choose a path where I satisfy my curiosity. As a scientist, I've always been curious about how the world is, and to remain curious is very important. If we lose that childlike wanting to have answers, if we become, you know, the sort of people who don't care, and I'm not interested in why this happens or whatever, I just want to just get on with my life, then, you know, we as a species would be poorer. So the best advice I've been given has always been to try and stay curious, to follow. I mean, I know when people say you follow your heart, not your head. Well, I'm a scientist, right? Your heart is just a muscle. It doesn't have emotions. But, you know, in everyday language, that sense of the meaning, following what you feel passionate about, if you can, is very important. And I've been lucky enough, privileged enough to be able to do that.
That's beautiful. Maybe, I don't know if you have any final words like to say, who will be listening to you. Yeah, any final words?
I guess, you know, a lot of people ask me, what is it that's unique about being a scientist? What is different about being a scientist? And I say, well, we are all, as children, we're all curious. We always ask questions. Most people stop asking questions when they grow up. I would encourage everyone, you don't have to be trained to be a scientist. You don't have to learn quantum physics or Einstein's relativity or robotics or whatever. Stay curious, ask questions, and try and have a rational explanation for what you see. And if you do that, then we're all scientists.